Hello, if you had asked me a month ago, even a week ago, if I trusted my wife, I would have said yes without hesitation. We had been together for nearly a decade, married for 6 years, and in all that time, I never once thought she was capable of something like this. She had a job that kept her on the road a lot, constant business trips, late flights, overnight stays, and early morning departures. I never questioned it. It was just part of her career, part of the life we had built together. She always reassured me that it was just work, that I had nothing to worry about, and I believed her because that's what you do when you love someone. You trust them. You take their word for it. You don't assume that every trip, every hotel booking, every missed call is some kind of secret life happening right under your nose. But then, the invitation arrived. It was an ordinary day. I had just gotten home from work, dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and started sorting through the mail like I always did. Bills, junk mail, a few flyers. And then, tucked between the usual mess of envelopes, was something different. A thick, elegant envelope, embossed with gold lettering, no return address. At first, I thought it was some promotional thing, maybe another one of those fancy invitations to events we sometimes got because of her job. But when I opened it, my hand started to shake. It was a wedding invitation, and on it, clear as day, was my wife's name, but the man next to her name wasn't me. I felt my entire body go cold. My mind couldn't process it at first. I read the words over and over, my brain trying to make sense of something that shouldn't have been possible. There had to be a mistake. A typo. A coincidence. Maybe it was someone with the same name. Maybe it was some elaborate prank. I turned the card over, looking for clues, looking for anything that would make this make sense. But there was nothing. Just a date, a location, and a confirmation that in less than 2 weeks, my wife was supposed to be marrying another man. My first instinct was denial. This couldn't be real. There was no way she was engaged to someone else. We were married. We lived together. We shared a home, a life. There had to be some logical explanation. Maybe she knew this guy, maybe she was part of the wedding somehow, maybe. My mind kept grasping at straws, searching for anything that would make this not what it looked like. But deep down, I felt it. That sick, twisting feeling in my gut, the one that told me this wasn't a mistake. I grabbed my phone, my hands unsteady as I scrolled to her number. I hesitated for a second, my thumb hovering over the call button. What was I even going to say? Hey, I just got a wedding invitation with your name on it, but you're already married to me. Care to explain? I shook my head, took a breath, and pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then she answered. Her voice was the same as always, calm, collected, completely unaware that I was staring at the evidence of her betrayal in my hands. I told her about the invitation. I kept my voice steady, casual, like I was just confused and needed some clarity. And she played her role perfectly. She laughed, brushed it off, said it was a mistake. Some clerical error. A mix-up. She sounded so convincing, so genuinely amused by the idea that I almost believed her. Almost. She told me there was no wedding. That there was no other man. That I was being ridiculous. And I told her I believed her. I told her it was probably just a weird coincidence. I told her not to worry, but I didn't believe her. Not for a second, because as soon as we hung up, my mind started working. If this was a mistake, then why did my gut tell me otherwise? If this was some innocent mix-up, then why did she sound just a little too rehearsed, just a little too quick with her excuses? I had spent years listening to her voice, knowing her patterns, understanding when she was being honest and when she was spinning something into what she wanted me to believe. And this? This wasn't honesty. I wasn't going to let it go. Not this time. I stayed up that night, unable to sleep, staring at the invitation, running through every possibility, every scenario. I could have confronted her, could have demanded to know the truth right then and there. But I knew her. If she was lying, she would find a way to talk her way out of it. She would twist the truth, turn the blame on me, make it seem like I was the one being unreasonable. She was too good at it. She had done it before in smaller ways, deflecting, dismissing, making me second-guess myself until I let things go, but I wasn't letting this go. Instead, I decided to do something I had never done before. I started watching. I started paying attention to things I had never questioned before: her schedule, her flights, the names of the places she went, the times she was unreachable, the little gaps in her stories that had always seemed insignificant but now felt like puzzle pieces I had never put together. And the more I looked, the more cracks I found. She had been careful. Very careful. But not careful enough, because when I started digging, I found more than I ever expected. And I realized the truth. My wife wasn't just having an affair, she was living two lives that I couldn't stop thinking about. The invitation. No matter how many times I told myself it had to be a mistake, that there was no way my wife was leading some kind of double life, the feeling wouldn't go away. I had never been the paranoid type, never been the guy who checked his wife's phone, never been the kind of man who questioned her every move, but now every detail of our relationship felt like a puzzle, and I had to put the pieces together. The way she was always on the road, the way she had suddenly become so invested in her job, the way her trips had started lasting longer than before, the way she had moments where she seemed distant even when she was home. And the way she had brushed off my calls so effortlessly, like she had already prepared an answer long before I even asked the question. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting, that I was reading too much into things, but my gut told me something was wrong. I knew her. I knew how she sounded when she lied, and that call hadn't just been a lie, it had been a well-practiced performance. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't confused. She was covering that I stayed up that night, staring at the invitation, memorizing every word, every letter, every detail that might give me a clue. The name of the other man, someone I had never heard of. The location, a city she had traveled to multiple times. The date, only 2 weeks away. The words felt heavier the longer I stared at them, like they weren't just ink on paper but something much worse, something that had the power to rewrite my entire life in an instant. If this was true, if she really was living another life, what did that say about the years we had spent together? What did that say about me? How had I been so blind? I knew confronting her again wouldn't do anything. If she had already lied once, she would just lie again, and I wasn't going to let her manipulate me out of the truth. So I did something I had never done before. I started checking everything. I went through our old emails, through old receipts, through old travel plans. I started comparing the dates of her trips, matching them with the times she had been unavailable, looking for patterns in places she visited more than once. And that was when I saw it. A pattern so obvious that I hated myself for not noticing it sooner. Every trip had one of two destinations. One of them was a city where her company actually had business ties. The other was the city on the wedding invitation. And every time she went to that second city, she was gone longer. The trips to the first city were shorter, real business trips with real itineraries, but the second? The second was different. The second always had a longer stay, fewer details, more gaps in communication. She would go silent for long stretches of time, say she was in meetings, say she was exhausted, say she would call me later and then never do it. And now, looking at it all at once, I saw what had been right in front of me the whole time. She had a second life there. The more I looked, the more I found. Transactions on her credit card for places that weren't hotels, for things that didn't make sense for a business trip. Jewelry she had never worn in front of me. Charges at restaurants I had never heard of. I even found a rental agreement for an apartment in that city, signed under her name but with an address I had never seen before. And that was when I knew she wasn't just cheating. She was building something else entirely, but that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was when I realized she had done this before, not with another man, not in the same way, but the pattern had been there for years. The secrecy, the small lies, the way she had always found a way to keep parts of herself separate from me. It was all there, I had just never put the pieces together. Maybe I hadn't wanted to. Maybe I had trusted her too much, loved her too much to ever believe she was capable of this. But now that I saw it, I couldn't unsee it that I could have called her, could have confronted her again, could have told her I had figured it all out, but I didn't. Because now I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let her talk her way out of this. I wasn't going to let her twist things around and make me doubt myself again. I was going to let her think she had won. I was going to let her think I still believed her. And then, on the day of her wedding, I was going to be there. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet. I didn't know how I was going to handle it, didn't know if I wanted to expose her in front of everyone, didn't know if I wanted to make her suffer in silence, didn't know if I wanted to confront the man who thought he was marrying a woman who already had a husband. But I knew I wasn't going to sit back and do nothing, that I had spent years being the fool, trusting her, believing in something that had never been real. But now, for the first time, I was the one with the advantage. She thought she was in control, thought she had everything perfectly planned, thought she had covered her tracks well enough that I would never find out. But she was wrong, she had no idea what was coming. That I spent the next few days pretending. Pretending I was the same husband I had always been. Pretending I had brushed off the invitation as a meaningless mistake. Pretending I wasn't staying up late, piecing together the details of the life my wife had been living behind my back. Every morning, I kissed her goodbye like nothing had changed. Every night, I listened to her talk about work, about her upcoming travel, about the stress she was under. And every time she looked at me, I wondered if she had ever really seen me at all. Had I ever been anything more to her than just a placeholder, someone to come home to while she built her perfect life somewhere else? Had she ever truly loved me, or had I been convenient, reliable, the safe option while she chased something better? I let her believe she was in control. I let her think she had smoothed everything over with her perfectly crafted excuse, that I had accepted her lie without question. But every second I was near her, I was watching, waiting, collecting every last piece of proof I needed. I went through everything, her emails, her messages, her travel history. I dug deeper than I ever had before, searching for anything I could use. And the more I found, the worse it became. She had been careful, but not careful enough. Her biggest mistake had been underestimating me. She had a second phone that I found it buried at the bottom of her suitcase, tucked beneath layers of clothes, like she thought I would never go looking. It was an older model, something she never carried around the house, something she had never mentioned before. The moment I powered it on, I knew. Messages. Call logs. Photos. Proof of everything she had been doing, right there in front of me. And then, the worst part, the contact name. His name. The same name from the wedding invitation. The messages weren't just flirtatious. They weren't just an affair. They were something much worse. She called him her husband. That I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing. She wasn't just cheating. She wasn't just lying. She had actually convinced another man, an entire group of people, that she was someone else. That she was single. That she was in love. That she was building a future with him, and the messages made it clear he had no idea I existed. That was when I realized just how deep her deception ran. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't just a fling. This was a double life she had spent years constructing, a lie so massive that it had its own world, its own reality, its own carefully planned details that had nothing to do with the life she shared with me. And now, in less than 2 weeks, she was planning to walk down the aisle with him, to say vows, to exchange rings, to promise herself to another man while still wearing the one I had given her. I had thought about confronting her before. I had thought about laying everything out in front of her and demanding the truth. But now, I knew I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. She didn't deserve to know what I knew. She didn't deserve to prepare herself. She didn't deserve to control how this ended. She thought she was the one playing the game, but now, it was my turn. That I put the phone back exactly as I had found it, making sure there was no sign I had ever touched it. I wiped every trace of my presence from the places I had searched, erasing every footprint I had left behind. I wasn't going to give her any reason to suspect me. I wasn't going to give her a single moment of doubt. Because when the time came, I wanted her to be completely blindsided that I started planning, that I looked up everything I could about the wedding, the venue, the guest list, the schedule of events. I found out where it was taking place, what time the ceremony was happening, who was invited. I found out everything I needed to know, preparing myself for the moment when I would step into the world she had built without me, and I wasn't going to go alone, that I had been silent for too long. I had let her control the story for too long. But now, I was the one writing the ending, that I wasn't just going to expose her, that I was going to destroy her, that I couldn't stop thinking about it. The texts, the messages, the way she called him her husband. The way she had managed to build an entirely separate life behind my back, like I was nothing more than an accessory she put on when it was convenient. She had played the perfect wife for me while doing the same thing for someone else, balancing two completely separate realities without missing a beat. And the worst part? She had never once slipped up enough for me to see it. Not until now. She had been so confident in her ability to juggle both lives, so sure that she had covered every track, that she had never even considered the possibility that I might figure it out. That was her mistake, but the mistake I had made was much worse. I had trusted her, that I replayed everything in my head, trying to understand how I had been so blind. The trips. The extended business meetings. The times she was too tired to talk, too busy to text, too preoccupied to act like the woman I had married. I had explained away every red flag, accepted every excuse, swallowed every lie, because I had never once thought she was capable of something like this. But now I knew. Now, I saw the truth. And the truth was, my wife wasn't just a liar. She was a fraud that I spent the next few days preparing. Every moment I had alone, I was planning, collecting every last piece of information I needed to make sure that when the time came, I would be ready. I didn't just want to confront her, I wanted to ruin her. I wanted her to feel the same sense of betrayal, the same gut-wrenching, soul-crushing realization that everything she thought was secure was about to come crashing down. I wanted to take away the one thing she had worked so hard to maintain control, that I tracked down everything I could about the wedding. I found the venue, the schedule, the guest list. I even found the man she was marrying, his social media, his work, his family. He had no idea. No clue that the woman he was about to commit his life to already belonged to someone else. He had been just as blind as I had been, believing every carefully crafted lie, falling for the same mask that had fooled me for years. And the more I looked at him, the more I hated him, not because he had taken my wife, but because he had no idea what kind of person he was about to marry. And then, there was the apartment. The place she had been using in her second life. I had seen the rental agreement, had found receipts for payments she had been making, but I hadn't actually gone there yet. That was my next step. I needed to see it. Needed to walk through the space she had created with him, the home she had built in secret while still coming home to me like nothing had changed. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I drove to the address, parked a few blocks away, sat in my car for a moment just staring at the building. It was a nice place. Too nice. More expensive than anything she should have been able to afford on her salary alone. Which meant only one thing: he had been paying for it. Funding their life together while she used my money to keep up appearances with me. She had been playing us both. I waited until I was sure no one was watching before I made my way to the entrance. I had planned ahead, had found a way to get in without raising suspicion. A quick lie to the building manager, a story about checking on a relative's apartment while they were out of town, and I was inside. I walked down the hallway, counting the numbers until I reached her door. My hands were steady. My breath was calm. But inside, I was burning. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was how lived in it felt. This wasn't just some temporary getaway, some place she used once in a while. This was a home. Their home. Pictures on the walls. Clothes in the closet. 2 toothbrushes in the bathroom. The little details of a life I had never known existed that I walked through the rooms slowly, taking it all in. The bed they shared. The kitchen where they cooked. The couch where they sat together, watching movies, talking, laughing. Every single part of it was proof of the life she had chosen over me, of the reality she had been building behind my back. And that was when I saw it, the wedding invitations, a stack of them, sitting on the counter. The same design, the same elegant lettering, the same names. The difference? These ones had been sent out. Dozens of them, addressed to people I had never met, people who had no idea that the woman they were celebrating was already married. I picked one up, turned it over in my hands, read the words again, letting them sink in. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just an affair, this was a betrayal so deep that there was no coming back from it. I put the invitation down, looked around one last time, then walked out. I knew what I had to do. The wedding was in a few days. I had time to prepare. Time to make sure that when I showed up, I would be ready. Ready to show her exactly what it felt like to have your world ripped away from you in an instant. She had taken everything from me. Now, I was going to take everything from her. I left the apartment, my mind racing with everything I had just seen, everything I had just learned. It wasn't just about the fact that she had been cheating. It wasn't just about the fact that she had been lying to me for years, building a life with another man while keeping me in the dark. It was the level of effort, the dedication to the deception, the way she had carefully constructed 2 completely separate lives without a second thought about what it would do to me when I finally found out. She hadn't just been sneaking around. She had been playing a role, switching between identities like it was nothing, like neither of us were real to her, like we were both just pieces in whatever twisted game she was playing. I sat in my car for a long time, staring out at the city, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. I had gone through every possible emotion over the past few days: shock, confusion, anger, betrayal. But now, sitting there, letting the weight of it all settle over me, I felt something else. Something colder. Something more focused. I wasn't just angry anymore. I wasn't just hurt. I was determined that I wasn't going to let her get away with this. That I had seen too many men in my position who let themselves get walked over, who confronted their cheating spouses and got nothing but empty apologies and fake remorse. I had seen how those stories ended: divorces where the cheating wife walked away with half of everything, where she played the victim, where she got to rewrite the story to make herself look like the one who had been wronged. That wasn't going to be me. She had been planning this for too long, had been manipulating the situation for too long, and if she thought she was going to walk away from this unscathed, she was dead wrong. The wedding was days away. I had time. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to make sure that when she stood in front of her family, her friends, the man who thought he was about to marry the love of his life, she would finally feel what it was like to lose everything in an instant. That I spent the next day gathering everything I needed. I made copies of the messages, the receipts, the rental agreement. I pulled together every single piece of evidence that proved she had been living 2 lives, that she had been lying to both of us. And then I started planning exactly how I was going to use it. There were so many ways I could do this. I could expose her before the wedding, call the other man and tell him everything, send the proof to his family, to his friends. I could ruin her before she even had a chance to walk down the aisle. But that wasn't enough. That wasn't what she deserved. She had spent years perfecting the act, perfecting the illusion. She had convinced everyone that she was this perfect, devoted woman, that she was in love, that she was exactly who she pretended to be. And if I was going to take her down, I needed to do it in a way that shattered that illusion completely. That I was going to let her go through with it. That I was going to let her put on the dress, stand at the altar, smile at the man who thought she belonged to him. I was going to let her believe she had gotten away with it, that she had pulled off the perfect con. And then, when the moment was right, I was going to take it all away from her. I could already picture it: the moment she saw me, standing in the crowd, watching her. The moment she realized that everything she had built was about to come crashing down. The moment the other man looked at me, then at her, then back at me, putting the pieces together in real time. The silence. The gasps. The whispers. The humiliation. She had spent years lying. Now, she was going to pay for it. I spent the next few days preparing. I made sure I had everything I needed, every detail locked down, every backup plan in place in case she tried to twist the story, in case she tried to make herself the victim. I wasn't going to give her that chance. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative anymore. And then, finally, the day arrived that I dressed carefully that morning, making sure I looked my best. Not because I cared about impressing anyone, but because I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to look at me and realize that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't some pathetic, heartbroken husband begging for answers. I wanted her to see the man who was about to ruin her. I drove to the venue, parked down the street, sat there for a moment just watching as guests arrived. I saw his family, his friends, people laughing, smiling, completely unaware that they were about to witness the most disastrous wedding they had ever seen. And then I saw her. She was beautiful. Of course she was. She had always been beautiful. That was part of what made her such a good liar. She knew how to use it, how to manipulate people with a smile, how to make them believe whatever she wanted them to believe. She moved through the crowd effortlessly, greeting guests, laughing, playing the part she had written for herself. And I watched, waiting, letting her enjoy those last moments of ignorance before I took everything away from her. The ceremony started. People took their seats. The music played. And then, finally, she walked down the aisle. The other man was waiting for her at the altar, smiling like a fool, like a man who truly believed he was about to marry the woman of his dreams. And I waited until she was standing there, until the room was quiet, until the officiant spoke the words that would lead them to their vows, and then I stood. She saw me immediately. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw real fear there. Real panic. She knew exactly why I was there. The room was silent. People turned to look at me, confused, whispering, trying to understand what was happening. The officiant paused, uncertain, looking between me and the couple standing at the altar. The other man frowned, glancing at my wife, at me, at the way her face had gone pale, and then, without breaking eye contact with her, I spoke. The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived, and I was going to make sure she never forgot it. The room was frozen in silence, every pair of eyes shifting between me, my wife, and the man standing beside her at the altar. It was that kind of silence that stretches, suffocating, thick with tension so palpable you could almost reach out and touch it. My wife, no, the woman I thought was my wife, stood there like a deer in headlights, her grip tightening on the bouquet in her hands, her knuckles white, her lips slightly parted like she was about to say something but couldn't quite form the words. The other man, the groom, the fool she had been leading along just like she had done to me, frowned, shifting uncomfortably, glancing between me and her as if he was struggling to understand what was happening. I let the silence hang there for a moment longer, watching her, watching the way her chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. Then, I took a step forward. The guests were whispering now, hushed voices rippling through the rows of chairs like waves crashing against rocks. Some looked confused. Others concerned. A few had already started reaching for their phones, sensing that whatever was about to happen would be worth recording. I reached into my pocket, pulling out my phone. I had spent the last week gathering everything, making sure I had all the proof I needed. I had screenshotted texts, saved emails, printed receipts, evidence of the double life she had built. I could have sent it all to the groom before the wedding, could have destroyed this before it even started, but that wasn't what she deserved. She had spent years lying, playing her games, deceiving the people who loved her without a single moment of remorse. If she thought she was going to walk away from this with her dignity intact, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. I turned the phone toward the guests first. The projector was already set up at the back of the hall, meant for a wedding slideshow, a celebration of the love she had supposedly built with this man. I had found a way in earlier that morning, just to be sure everything was ready. I tapped the screen, and in an instant, the slideshow she had prepared was replaced with something else. Something much worse: photos. Screenshots. Videos. Messages. The gasp started almost immediately. On the massive screen behind them, the proof of her lies flashed one after another. Texts between her and me, texts between her and him. Reservations for hotels in different cities, matching dates that lined up with business trips she had supposedly taken alone. Photos of her with him in one place, photos of her with me in another, her smile the same, the lies seamless. And then, the worst of it, a message she had sent to one of her friends, the one that had sealed everything for me when I found it. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, but at least I get the best of both worlds. The murmurs grew into voices, sharp and disbelieving. The groom's mother gasped audibly. Someone dropped a glass. The officiant took a step back, looking between me, her, and the man beside her with wide eyes, completely unsure of what to do. The groom finally turned to her, confusion and horror mixing in his expression as he reached for her arm, his voice a low, sharp whisper. I couldn't hear what he said, but it didn't matter. I could see it in the way his face contorted, the way he pulled back from her as if she were something toxic, something diseased. My wife, my ex-wife, because after today, there would be no coming back from this, was shaking now. Her breath came in quick, erratic gasps, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the bouquet. She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw something other than cold calculation in her eyes. I saw panic. Real, raw panic. She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. This, I said, my voice even, loud enough for everyone to hear, is the woman you were about to marry. I gestured toward the screen. The woman who has been lying to you for years. The woman who married me first. The woman who has been living two separate lives, with two separate men, playing us both like fools. I turned my gaze to the guests, letting the weight of my words settle over them. And you were all here to celebrate her. More murmurs. Someone cursed under their breath. The groom's father was already standing, his face red with anger, while his mother covered her mouth with both hands, looking like she might faint. I stepped back, watching, waiting, letting the reality of it all crash down on her. She had spent years controlling the narrative, spinning her lies, twisting the truth to suit her needs. But not anymore. This was her reckoning. The groom turned back to her, his face pale now, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles twitching. I could only imagine what was going through his mind, how his world had just shattered in front of everyone he knew. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost, but then, something incredible happened. Instead of pleading, instead of apologizing, instead of even trying to salvage what was left, she snapped, her mask cracked completely, the perfect image she had tried so hard to maintain falling apart in real time. She turned on me, her eyes blazing with something furious, something desperate. How could you do this? She hissed, her voice shaking with rage. You had no right, no right? I cut her off, laughing, a short, sharp sound that held no amusement. You think I had no right? You stood there, smiling at him, knowing you were already married to me. You planned an entire wedding while still coming home to me. You lied to everyone. And I had no right? She looked around, searching for support, searching for someone to take her side, but there was no one. Her family was silent. The groom's family looked like they wanted to tear her apart. Even her bridesmaids were slowly stepping away, distancing themselves like they didn't want to be associated with the disaster unfolding in front of them. She had lost, completely, and that was when I turned my back on her for the last time. I walked down the aisle, past the stunned guests, past the ruined decorations, past the wreckage of the life she had tried to build on nothing but lies. As I reached the door, I heard the first chair scrape against the floor. The first person to leave. Then another. And another. The wedding was over. She had destroyed everything she had worked so hard to create, and she had done it all by herself. I walked out of the venue without looking back. The noise behind me was growing, guests murmuring, chairs scraping against the floor, the rising sound of chaos as the weight of what had just happened fully sank in. But I was done. I had done what I came to do. I had let her ruin herself in front of everyone who mattered to her. I had exposed the life she had so carefully constructed, shattered the perfect illusion she had spent years maintaining. She had always been in control. Always dictating the rules, always making sure she had the upper hand. But not anymore. Now, she had nothing that I reached my car, unlocked the door, and got in. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. I had expected to feel more. Maybe anger. Maybe satisfaction. Maybe some kind of relief. But all I felt was emptiness. Not sadness, no, that part of me had died the moment I realized who she really was. It was just a hollow, final understanding that the woman I had married, the woman I had loved, had never actually existed. She had been a fabrication, a role she had played perfectly until the moment I had torn the curtain down and revealed the truth that I pulled out my phone and checked my notifications. Messages were already coming in, some from people who had been at the wedding, some from mutual friends, a few from numbers I didn't even recognize. I didn't bother opening them. I could already imagine what they said. Shock. Disbelief. Some would be supportive. Some would be asking for more details. And then there was one from her that I stared at it for a moment before opening it. How could you do this to me? A bitter laugh escaped me. Even now, even after everything, she still refused to take responsibility. In her mind, I was the villain. I was the one who had crossed the line. Not her. Not the lies. Not the years of betrayal. Just me, exposing the truth she never wanted anyone to see. That I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Nothing I could say that would make her understand the depth of what she had done. She had spent so long weaving her lies that she had started believing them herself. She had convinced herself that she was untouchable, that she could have everything, that she would never have to face the consequences of her actions. And when the moment came, when it all came crashing down around her, she couldn't process it. That I drove back home, the weight of the day settling over me, pressing against my chest in a way I hadn't expected. I had won. She was ruined. Her life, her second marriage, her reputation, it was all over. And yet, sitting in the quiet of my car, I realized that I didn't actually feel victorious. There was no celebration to be had. Just a slow, creeping exhaustion that wrapped itself around me like a heavy fog. When I walked into the house that no longer felt like ours, but mine, everything looked the same. The furniture was untouched. The photos were still on the walls. Her shoes were still by the door. But none of it mattered anymore. None of it belonged to her now that I had already spoken to my lawyer. The divorce papers were ready. All I had to do was sign them. I pulled them out of the folder where I had kept them hidden for the past week, staring at the pages, the words, the final, legal confirmation that this chapter of my life was closing. And I signed. Without hesitation. Without doubt. Without regret. Then, I packed her things. That I didn't rage. I didn't destroy anything. I just methodically went through the house, gathering everything she had ever touched, everything that had ever belonged to her, and I put it all in boxes. By the time I was finished, the house felt different. Lighter. The air wasn't weighed down by her anymore. I had the boxes sent to her apartment, the other apartment, the one she had with him. Let her figure it out. Let her deal with the consequences of everything she had built and lost. I didn't need closure. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need to hear another lie from her lips ever again. And then, as the final act, I blocked her number. She had spent years controlling me, manipulating me, making me feel like I was the one who had to prove my worth. But not anymore. She had taken everything I had given her and burned it to the ground. So I let her sit in the ashes. The fallout was immediate. I heard through mutual friends that her second fiancé, the man she had almost married, wanted nothing to do with her. He had left the wedding before she even had a chance to explain herself. His family was furious, his friends disgusted. Her own family wasn't even answering her calls. She had spent so much time convincing everyone she was this perfect, loving, dedicated woman, and now they all knew the truth. She had nothing left, and me, for the first time in years, I felt free that I wasn't broken. I wasn't destroyed. I wasn't some tragic, betrayed man licking his wounds. I was done. And that was all that mattered. As I sat in my now empty house, the silence around me no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful because I knew, without a doubt, that I would never let someone like her have a place in my life again.